In the year 1491, the continents we now call the Americas were teeming with life, culture, and civilizations. From the snow-covered tundras of the north to the dense jungles of the Amazon, from great empires to small nomadic tribes, millions of people called this land home. They spoke thousands of languages, followed diverse religions, and built magnificent cities. Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, had floating gardens and grand temples, rivaling the size and sophistication of any European city at the time. In the Andes, the Incan Empire stretched thousands of miles with an advanced road system and state-run economy. Farther north, great mound cities like Cahokia stood as testimony to the complexity of North America's indigenous cultures. But all of that was about to change, drastically and forever. In 1492, a Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus, backed by the Spanish crown, crossed the Atlantic Ocean and arrived in the Caribbean. He believed he had found a new route to Asia, but in reality, he had stumbled upon a world unknown to Europeans. What followed was a wave of exploration, conquest, and colonization that would reshape the planet. Columbus's voyages opened the floodgates. Within decades, the Spanish were exploring deep into the heart of the American continents. Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico in 1519, and by 1521, the mighty Aztec Empire had fallen. Cortés did not do it alone. He formed alliances with native tribes who resented Aztec rule, and diseases like smallpox devastated the indigenous population before swords ever had to be drawn. Just over a decade later, in 1532, Francisco Pizarro set his sights on the Incan Empire. He captured the Incan emperor Atahualpa, ransomed him for gold, and then executed him anyway. The Spanish took over an empire that stretched over modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and parts of Chile and Argentina. These conquests were violent, brutal, and efficient. They were followed by mass conversions to Christianity, the establishment of colonial rule, and the extraction of resources, especially gold and silver, which would flood into Europe and fuel centuries of empire building.
But Spain wasn't the only European power with its eye on the New World. Portugal, due to the Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494, claimed Brazil and began building sugar plantations along the coast. To work these plantations, they imported enslaved Africans in enormous numbers, creating a transatlantic slave trade that would last for over 300 years and tear apart millions of lives. Meanwhile, the French, Dutch, and English began carving out their own colonies. The English established Jamestown in Virginia in 1607, followed by the Puritans who landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620. Over time, 13 colonies developed along the eastern seaboard of North America. The French focused on the fur trade in Canada and the Mississippi River Valley. They built forts and trading posts, and often formed more cooperative relationships with indigenous peoples, though these too were marked by moments of betrayal and conflict. The Dutch set up New Netherland in what is now New York, only to lose it to the British in 1664. As more Europeans arrived, the indigenous populations suffered, not just from warfare, but from disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, foreign to the Americas, swept through villages like wildfires. In some regions, up to 90% of the population died. Entire cultures were extinguished before Europeans even physically reached them. But resistance was never absent. Native warriors fought for their lands. Leaders rose up, like Metacom in New England, Pope in New Mexico, and countless unnamed heroes across the continents. Yet they were often outgunned, outnumbered, and weakened by disease and betrayal.
European powers also began fighting each other over land and resources in the Americas. The 7 Years' War, fought in the mid-1700s, was the first truly global war and had major consequences in the New World. Britain emerged victorious, taking control of French Canada and much of North America. The British now ruled a vast empire, but it came at a cost. Taxes to pay for the war led to unrest in the 13 colonies. In 1776, the American Revolution broke out, and in 1783, the United States of America gained its independence. It wouldn't be the last revolution in the Americas. Inspired by the American Revolution and fueled by Enlightenment ideas, people across Latin America began to rise up. From 1810 to 1830, a wave of revolutions swept through Spanish colonies. Leaders like Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, and Miguel Hidalgo challenged colonial rule and declared new republics. By the mid-1800s, most of Latin America had broken free from Spain and Portugal. But colonization did not end with independence. Native populations continued to lose land. European settlers kept expanding westward in North America, pushing tribes onto reservations. In South America, new republics often treated indigenous groups as obstacles to be removed or assimilated. The colonization of the Americas wasn't a single event, but a process stretching over centuries. From the first Spanish conquests to the westward expansion of the United States, from sugar plantations in the Caribbean to mining in the Andes, it was a complex, often violent reshaping of the land and its people.
It was also an exchange of goods, animals, plants, and ideas. The so-called Columbian Exchange introduced horses, wheat, and steel to the Americas, while potatoes, corn, tomatoes, and chocolate were brought to Europe. This reshaped diets and economies worldwide. But the greatest cost was human. Tens of millions of indigenous lives were lost. Millions of Africans were enslaved. Countless cultures, languages, and histories were wiped out. And yet, many survived. Today, indigenous peoples across the Americas continue to preserve their languages, protect their lands, and reclaim their stories. They remind us that colonization was not just about discovery. It was about domination, but also resilience. The colonization of the Americas was one of the most transformative episodes in human history. It redrew maps, restructured societies, and created the modern world as we know it. But it came with a price, a legacy of exploitation, resistance, survival, and remembrance. And that legacy still echoes today.